Roland synthesizers in the 90s have garnered an interesting reputation over time. Some people still love them for their classic tried-and-true sounds with a great variety of high-quality instrument samples ranging from funky slap basses to expansive and warm pads, while others deride them for their overusage and often cheesy sound. Regardless of what you think of them, it's hard to deny that they were highly influential in the music-making world, with just one of their synthesizers alone, the JV-1080, being used in more records than any other synthesizer in the world. It was a real powerhouse, and when combined with even just one sRJV board, it became significantly more powerful. These higher-end synthesizers were costly, however, putting them well out of reach of many up-and-coming composers. So, besides saving up, what could you do if you wanted to get those classic Roland sounds but didn't have the cash to get the latest and greatest professional model? You could pick up something like this. The Roland Sound Canvas series was aimed at less experienced composers and are a collection of classic Roland sounds from all sorts of sources, combined with an easy-to-use interface, superb MIDI support, and a tiny form factor that made them great for people with limited space, such as the desktop music market that they were so often aimed at in bundle packages. And for the time they were on the market, they were a great success with people looking to get into composing who didn't have the money or space for one of those larger synths. And while they still maintain some level of popularity now with retro computer gamers who enjoy them for their amazing sounding classic DOS games, something that's rarely discussed nowadays is, well, actually using them in music. In today's video, I want to go over the sound canvas that I own and use on a near daily basis for music work, the SC-88 Pro. While on the surface, it doesn't look too different from the earlier SC-55 and SC-88, the story really couldn't be more different. With tons of new sounds on offer taken from Roland's JV and sRJV products and a powerful effects filter that could beef up and enhance nearly any sound thrown at it, it was darn impressive at the time, even with its hefty price tag of around $800 US in 1996. Admittedly, that price tag was still a respectable bit cheaper than the monstrous $1,200 of the JV-1080, or even worse, the $1,700 price tag of the JV-2080 released just a year later. With all that said, I've been using mine for about half a year now, and in that time have progressed a lot as a musician and have found myself starting to branch out to other synths. So, is it still worth picking one of these up, or should you skip out on it altogether? Let's get right into it. As the second to last major revision of the Sound Canvas line, and perhaps the largest leap in quality from one unit to the next in the series, the 88 Pro boasts a whole heap of features, including 32 MIDI channels over 2 MIDI ports, 1,117 instrument patches, 45 drum kits, 64 insertion effects, 8 types of reverb, chorus, and delay effects, official support for General MIDI and Roland GS, unofficial support for Yamaha XG, partial backwards compatibility with the SC-55, full backwards compatibility with the SC-88, and stereo 18-bit 32 kHz audio output. It's a pretty impressive and vast list of features, and the unit only gets more impressive from here once you start digging into it. In terms of appearance, the 88 Pro is a beautiful piece of gear that strikes a great balance between industrial and consumer aesthetics, which I guess makes sense considering the market it was aiming for. It's got this light and dark metallic gray color scheme, highlighted by muted white and orange text that allows it to appear soft enough to blend in with any environment, while still having enough to stand out about it that it doesn't become dull to look at. Anyways, the front of the device has pretty much all of your controls. You get your standard power button, a volume knob which doubles as a tone test button for trying out sounds and verifying that outputs work, a front MIDI in for convenience when hooking up a keyboard, a 3.5mm stereo headphone jack for private listening, a 2.8 by 1 inch screen, and a variety of multi-function buttons to do editing, instrument changing, and a whole bunch of other stuff. All of the buttons have their basic and most important functions clearly labeled, although there are a lot of additional things you'll want to dive into that can be accessed only through button combinations, so having a copy of the manual on hand, either printed or in PDF form from Roland's website, is really recommended. Speaking of buttons, these buttons feel expectedly nice for a device carrying a near $1,000 price tag, with a nice click to them whenever you press them in. There's also a small variety of them, which may not seem like anything important, but it makes it easy to feel around the unit in the dark, as the variety makes it easy to tell where your hand is currently once you've learned the positions. Another nice touch is that all the buttons line up with the LCD screen. For example, on the right of the third row of the screen is the amount of chorus being applied to the instrument. If you want to change the chorus, then you just press the button on the right of the third row of the edit panel. In a shocking twist, turning the unit over to the back reveals the back, which has a huge selection of back things to play with, including 3 MIDI ports. MIDI in A, which is used to access the first 16 channels on the unit, MIDI in B, which is used for the last 16, and a MIDI out port that doubles as a MIDI through if you set it up as such on the unit. You can also ditch the MIDI ports entirely by using an RS-232C serial connection, although this really isn't an option on modern computers to my knowledge. Between that specific serial port standard being disregarded in favor of USB, and the Roland serial MIDI driver having received no updates since Windows XP, you're basically out of luck unless you're that one person running Windows XP. The best option, and the easiest one to get working on any computer, is to use some sort of MIDI cable. For older computers running vintage operating systems like Windows 98, this is usually something like a game port to MIDI and controller breakout, but nowadays I and most other people use some sort of USB MIDI device. There's a number of these available for purchase at any given time, but I recommend avoiding knockoff ones made by no-name Chinese companies, as these tend to have trouble supporting sysx commands, which is necessary to make the most out of, let's face it, any MIDI synth. My go-to for MIDI cables has always been the Roland UM series. These all have great sysx support, are class compliant, meaning they'll work on any computer, including Linux and Mac machines, and are very easy to get a hold of, both brand new and used at good prices. I've also heard good things about Mote2 and iConnectivity's MIDI adapters, which might be your best option if you're looking to use both the MIDI A and B ports on the 88 Pro, as Roland currently doesn't manufacture any 2-in-2-out MIDI interfaces. Although there are some older UM models such as the UM2 and UM3 line of devices that support 2 and 3 ports respectively, and to my understanding they work just as well as the other UM series devices. For audio output, you get 2 sets of stereo RCA, which allow you to listen to the MIDI in A and MIDI in B separately, and an RCA input to let you plug in another device. For the most part, this input is pretty solid and doesn't cause any quality degradation, though my particular unit has an annoying problem with dropping sound on the left side. It's fixed by a simple tap on the knob most of the time, but it is annoying. Regarding audio outputs, however, I've had no problems with them at all, and I found them to be of extremely good quality. They have barely any noise and sound absolutely amazing when hooked up to even a half-decent audio interface or sound card. And finally, for powering on the device, you get a power cable that's permanently attached to the unit. Opening up the unit to work on it and take a look is easy to do. Just take the 2 screws off the left and right sides, and the 3 on the back to slide the top cover off, and then the 7 holding the motherboard in place. They're all pretty small, so it takes about 5 minutes tops to get in. The circuitry is split into a few segments connected via a series of cables. The board on top is the main board, and this contains the 16-bit H8/510 CPU and the M3-888 1M2 sub-CPU, the sound ICs, sample ROM chips, DRAM chips, and 2 SRAM chips for storing user data powered by a CR2302 battery. The boards held on the bottom are the analog board, which contains the DACs and various bits needed to provide the analog audio output, the power switch board, and the power supply. The only thing you would really need to be doing here, unless the unit you bought was really abused, is replacing the battery, which I highly recommend doing, as all of the battery-powered Sound Canvas models seem to be really prone to leakage. Besides that, there's no reason to really peek around in here. Unlike professional Roland synths, the 88 Pro cannot be expanded beyond what's initially included, as there's no slots for sRJV80 boards or otherwise. There also aren't really any mods out there for the device that I'm aware of, with the only one I've seen being a mod by a Japanese user to add optical audio output to the device using an Arduino, which is pretty awesome if a bit unnecessary. That's enough about that, however. Let's talk about the meat of the unit. The 88 Pro advertises 1,117 high-quality instruments, many of which are cut-down versions of stock sounds from the JV1080 and its first few expansion boards, such as the orchestral and vintage synth boards. That overall number is a bit of a half-truth, though. While there are technically 1,117 selectable instrument patches, there's only around 700 samples, as some patches are duplicated for backwards compatibility with the SC55 and SC88 maps, but more on those in a bit. This same thing applies to the drum kits too, though to a lesser extent. There's 42 patches, including free sound effects kits for a total of 45, but the actual number without duplicates is a slightly less impressive 38 unique kits. 700 some odd instruments and 38 drum kits is still a pretty wide variety of sounds, however, and there's enough here that anyone who's into making any type of music will enjoy what's on offer, whether that be jazz, electronic, metal, classical, or anything in between. Because this is a Roland GS device and part of the Roland GS standard is maintaining at least some level of general MIDI backwards compatibility, the sounds are organized in a way that allows them to stay compatible with the GM standard while still offering composers easy access to the wide variety of sounds available. So here's how they're organized. You have 128 basic instruments referred to as capital tones. These are the standard general MIDI sounds such as piano 1, string, square wave, etc, etc. They can all be accessed for a program change command or by using the instrument buttons on the front panel. Once you've found the type of sound you want, you can select a variation of it by pressing instrument left and right at the same time and scrolling, or by pressing EFX value left or right. This makes instrument selection an absolute breeze as everything is logically sorted and easy to navigate if you know the general MIDI standard layout. Now, unfortunately, unlike the JV1080 and other high-end synthesizers, you cannot create new sounds on this thing. You're limited to what's on board, although I don't see that as a big deal, as what's on board of this thing is varied enough, and there's a ton of effects that can be applied to any sound to radically change the sounds. You have your run-of-the-mill reverb, chorus, and delay effects, along with cutoff and resonance filters, volume and vibrato envelopes, and new to the Sound Canvas family for the first time, Insertion Effects, similar to what Yamaha had been offering for their MU line around the same time the original SC-88 launched. Additionally, similar to the MU series in its performance mode that offered beefed up patches using 1 to 4 instruments simultaneously, the 88 Pro offers a collection of 128 patches that use a similar idea. These patches use 1 to 2 instruments at the same time across 1 to 2 channels, often paired with carefully tuned insertion effects to create much richer sounds than is normally possible. With all that said, I think it's time to show off the types of sounds on offer here. I'm going to play some tunes that I've made and some of my favorite music from games and other composers, and that'll hopefully give you an idea of how it all mixes together. Something that is always worth discussing with synths is sound editing, so let's talk about sound editing. Since the 88 Pro was aimed at more or less being an easy-to-use, jack-of-all-trades rompler with tons of sounds to suit every genre rather than an expandable, customizable, and complex synth, there isn't a whole lot you can do here. The right at the front panel gives you access to the settings you'll be changing the most: volume level, pan, reverb, chorus, and MIDI channel receive. The first few are pretty self-explanatory, but the last is interesting as it allows you to get a richer or more unique sound by stacking sounds on top of each other. On the bottom of the front panel, you can edit the vibrato envelope, cutoff and resonance filters, the ADR envelope, and most importantly, the insertion effects. The interface for all that is really intuitive. You press select to select what part of the sound you want to edit, and press the buttons labeled for each function. And for insertion effects, you press effects to get in the menu and press the label buttons. Easy peasy. That's not all you can do though. There's a lot of things you can change by using button combinations. For example, pressing all and then one of the right parameter buttons will let you make global changes, and pressing all and then select will let you edit the global 2-band EQ. There's a lot more than just that though, such as being able to change the volume and panning level of individual drum sounds, and many more that are documented in the manual, so if there's anything you're curious about, it'd be best to check that to confirm if it's there or not. One of the nice things about the 88 Pro is that any changes you make are saved until the device receives some sort of MIDI reset, so even if you power it off, until you intentionally try to reset the device, those settings will stay. If you're not fond of front panel editing, there are a couple of alternatives. The first is to do editing through MIDI commands, which isn't too bad for basic things like reverb and chorus, as these are controlled through standard MIDI CCs. Insertion effects, however, you'll have to use SysX for those, which can be frustrating to do without the help of a tool. The second option is to use, well, a tool, such as GS Advanced Editor. This is what I use for any intense editing. It's simple, easy to use, and gives you control over absolutely everything. And when you're done editing, you can export a standard MIDI file which can be imported into your MIDI editor of choice. Unfortunately, getting a hold of an actual copy of GSAE is a monumental challenge, as it was only ever bundled with Sound Canvas units or available directly from purchase from Edirol. I asked Roland if they ever planned to make the software publicly available again, and they said they had no plans. So for now, your best option for getting it is either to buy a rare copy or download it from the internet. So, at this point I've been pretty positive about the 88 Pro, but there are some things I want to touch on that I think are worth noting. First off, the power supply here isn't universal. Kinda. It uses a transformer that has a few different pins that a wire can be soldered to, and this will determine what type of power the 88 Pro will be able to accept. If you live in Europe, then this can be a problem, as 88 Pros native to that region don't seem to be very common, although thankfully, some eBay sellers in Japan are kind enough to change the voltage upon ordering the item, and some others will sell units that are pre-modded to European voltages. Another thing that could debatably be an issue is the compatibility modes of the SC-88 Pro. The SC-88 compatibility is perfect by virtue of it and the 88 Pro sharing the same CPU and DAC, while the SC-55 compatibility is overall questionable, but it leans on good. Some of the sounds aren't included on the storage chips due to, I'm guessing, limited space, and will instead play their newer 88 or 88 Pro counterparts even when the 55 map is selected. This is where the questionable part of it comes into play, because it results in music that sounds noticeably wrong compared to a real 55. But only sometimes. While a few games, such as the original Descent, which has MIDI music composed for and on the SC-55, do sound wrong, others sound spot on. One such example is Cercarian Forever. While we're on the topic of compatibility, I think it's worth bringing up the Yamaha XG compatibility mode. It's a feature of the SC-88 Pro and onward that I rarely see discussed, and it's not without reason. It's really tacked on. The best way I can describe it is that it's like listening to a mediocre cover band tackle one of your favorite songs. I mean, the instruments are all correct, but it's not really pleasant to listen to. I've uploaded a few tracks onto my alternate channel so you can make your own judgment, but if you ask me, the mode isn't anything worth using. And for that matter, neither is the Roland MT32 mode that once again returns from earlier Sound Canvas models. As with those earlier models, sound customization and programming is out of the question, which makes sense considering the MT32 uses LA synthesis unlike the Sound Canvas family, so you're stuck with the stock 128 sounds. They don't sound very accurate to the original model though, so even as an extra just for backwards compatibility, it's not worth using. So here's my verdict on all that. While the SC-55 tunes are good enough for most games, anyone wanting perfect compatibility or desiring to make SC-55 music should seek one of those out instead. That's not to say Roland did a bad job making SC-55 compatibility. Contrary to what a lot of people have said and what I originally thought, getting an SC-55 and comparing the two has shown me it's not nearly as bad as people make it out to be, but it ain't perfect. Now, if you want to listen to Yamaha XG tunes, then there's no debate. You need to buy an XG Synth instead. There's a whole world of affordable ones out there that'll do you one better than this thing ever could. And if you want to listen to MT32 music, then you should pick up an MT32 or look into emulation options, as those are way better than the crappy offerings of the 88 Pro, and really the whole Sound Canvas family. Still though, I love the rest of what's here, and if what I've said has convinced you to purchase one, or at least made you think about it, there are some things to consider. First off, if all you're after is sound and effects, you don't mind some inaccuracies, and you're not dead set on owning a physical piece of hardware, Sound Canvas VA is an option worth considering. Released in late 2015, Sound Canvas VA is a VST that seeks to replicate all of the major revisions of the Sound Canvas hardware, with the SC-55, SC-88, SC-88 Pro, and SC-8820 all being represented in full here, giving you a pretty complete set of Sound Canvas sounds. I didn't use it for too long for this video, but I will say at the least that the user interface is good enough, if a bit unprofessional looking. It's easy to get up and running with good compatibility with various popular DAWs, and the compatibility of it compared to real hardware is mostly really good. Personally though, I much prefer the look, sound, and feel of the real hardware. That said, there's always alternatives available. The 88 Pro didn't mark the end of the Sound Canvas family. It ended up getting a few successors that all came complete with a full set of SC-88 Pro sounds, those being the 8850, 8820, and SC-D70, unrelated to the Roland D70, which is also unrelated to the other Roland D-series synths, and wow, that's an awful naming scheme. Besides adding some new instruments onto the 88 Pro set, those models all come with some new neat additional features, such as the 8850 adding a jog dial, which allows you to select instruments and change values, a much welcome addition, MIDI over USB on all of them, eliminating the need for USB MIDI adapter, USB power for the SC-8820, which is awesome, and for the D70, audio over USB or optical out, and an instrument input, 7 years after Yamaha did it. Of course, it's always worth considering alternatives from other brands that might be better suited to what you want. The most obvious ones are the late model Yamaha MUs, the 100 and the triple aughts. I don't own a 100, but I do have a 1000X, and it definitely has some merits over the 88 Pro and the 8850. Unlike the Sound Canvas series, with the exception of the 70, which only work as romplers and nothing more, the MU series offers features beyond that. The MU80 and beyond have a single input for synths and guitars that you can apply effects to. The MU100 added a Yamaha plug slot in addition to that, so you can add new features like vocal effects and an analog modeling synth. The MU128 gave you free plug slots and 2 inputs for stereo instruments, and the MU2000 and 1000 added USB support, digital audio out, and a built-in USB MIDI interface on top of all of that. Do these things make the MU series better? That's up to you to decide. Personally, there are things I could live without, but they are nice to have. The instrument inputs especially are super handy for hooking up synths and guitars, since I don't have a mixer, but I'll spare everyone my extended thoughts on this until I can make a proper video about it. I think the only thing that really matters in the end, though, are the sounds, and in that regard, I kinda prefer the 88 Pro. Maybe it's just personal preference, or maybe it's just nostalgia for games I grew up playing, always using Roland sounds in their music, but I think there's just a nice and very pleasant tone to all of the sounds on offer here. While it does generally sound kinda outdated compared to modern day VSTs and soft synths, it never sounds dated in a bad way. It's the kind that makes me feel nostalgic for an era of music that's gone by. But when used in a way that really takes advantage of all the editing features on offer, it can sound surprisingly modern and is still totally usable today if you ask me. It's just a piece of gear that makes me happy to use and play around with. So while you might not be making the next big pop hit using just it, I can still wholeheartedly recommend it for what it is. A fun, easy use, and enjoyable slice of 90s synth history that still has some value today.